Kiselyova. This project emerged in the first months of the full-scale Russian-Ukrainian war, and to a great extent reflects our own trajectory from Kharkiv to Lublin, a trajectory of displacement. It has now been almost 4 years since we moved, a transition that feels both very distant and still acutely present. We conducted our first interview in April 2022 and have continued gathering narratives up to present day. This afternoon, I will focus on our methodological approach to intervene, while Yulia will address the central analytical dimensions of our study, the agency of displaced Ukrainian scholars in the humanities. A few words about the sociopolitical and historiographical background. One of the key consequences of the Russian-Ukrainian war has been a large-scale wave of forced migration from Ukraine. As of October 2025, 5.7 million Ukrainian refugees had been officially registered worldwide. This unprecedented movement of people was met with exceptional solidarity and support from European countries, especially during the first months of the war. At the beginning of invasion, more than 90% of displaced Ukrainians expressed their willingness to return home. However, according to Ukrainian demography, after 3 years of war, only 30 to 40% are now expected to return, or even fewer. This poses significant challenges both for Ukraine and for the countries that have taken in large numbers of refugees. Academic migration has become part of these broader processes. According to several studies, between 15 and 18.5% of Ukrainian researchers, nearly 1/5 of the academic community, are currently abroad. This situation creates serious risk for Ukraine's system of science and higher education, which had already suffered from a rigid vertical government structure, excessive bureaucratization, and chronic underfunding. For this reason, the renewal of Ukrainian academia features prominently in current plans for post-war reconstruction. In UNESCO's action plan, the outflow of intellectual capital is identified as one of the most serious threats to Ukraine's ability to restore its scientific and intellectual potential. We have now seen a rapid growth of studies focusing on Ukrainian scholars displaced by the war. The publication on this slide reflects the main strands of this emerging research field. They include empirical surveys documenting the scale and immediate effects of academic displacement, qualitative and mixed method studies examining the experience and trajectories of Ukrainian researchers abroad, and reflective works in which scholars themselves analyze their professional and personal transformations. We have joined this growing field with our own oral history project. It examines the forced migration of humanities scholars from a region affected by military conflict in Ukraine. The first wave of this movement began in 2014 when universities and research institutions were relocated from Donbas region to central and western Ukraine. The second wave followed after February 24th, 2022, when migration crossed the western border and spread across Europe. Our focus on humanities scholars was shaped by two key factors. On the one hand, many of them have been actively involved in documenting the war, preserving cultural heritage, and reflecting on its social consequences. On the other hand, national recovery strategies tend to prioritize the natural and technical science, which risk deepening the ongoing crisis in the humanities. You can see the objective of our project on the slide, and the methodology of our project is based on the collecting and analyzing oral history interview with faculty and staff of Ukrainian academic institution, as well as with European scholars who have been directly involved in supporting Ukrainian researchers in exile. Let me briefly outline the profile of our interviewees. In total, we conducted 69 interviews, 49 of them with Ukrainian scholars, and this is the group I will focus on today. They represent universities, research institutes, and museums from all regions of Ukraine, with a clear concentration from the east, where the hostilities were most intense and parts of the territory were under occupation. 6 of our interviewees had already left occupied Donetsk and Lugansk back in 2014. At the time of the interview, most were working at German and Polish university, with smaller groups spread across other European countries. This reflects the broader westward movement of Ukrainian academia. Ukrainian scholars are present in 35 countries, although Poland and Germany continue to host the largest number. These are predominantly highly qualified academics with 15 to 25 years of professional experience. Because of except ban on men, the group is mostly female. 4 men also took part. Many arrived with their children or elderly parents, and the need to protect their families was an important factor shaping their migration decisions. Finally, an important aspect of academic agency concerns scholars' pre-war international experience and their patterns of self-identification. International mobility has highly uneven. 31 of the 45 interviewees had some form of international background. Internship, exchanges, participation in projects or conference, although for many its experience was only episodic. 14 had no international academic mobility at all. Their contacts with European colleagues were limited to conferences held in Ukraine. This imbalance shaped their migration trajectories. Those with prior connection moved more quickly, while others had to find support on their own. Our project focuses on scholars who left Ukraine after February 24, who are formally classified as forced migrants. Yet, as quotations on the slide show, many interviewees reject the label refugees, stressing that they left through professional channels and understand their move as a continuation of academic mobility. Those who do identify as refugees are mostly scholars who fled in the first day of the invasion or from occupied territories, although even they often began to reinterpret their situation once new academic opportunities emerged. Despite this difference in self-identification, we refer to all participants as displaced scholars, since the danger created by the war was the primary reason for their departure. Interviewees were recruited through snowball sampling. We first contacted colleagues we already knew and then asked each participant to recommend others who might be willing to take part. This approach not only facilitates access but also reveals the structure of existing academic network. And it helps build trust between interviewer and interviewee and significantly reduce the number of refusals. The main research tool was a semi-structured qualitative interview, which allowed for flexible questioning and gave interviewees space to guide the conversation. We used two separate questionnaires, one for Ukrainian scholars and another for their European colleagues. Before each interview, we reviewed publicly available biographical information about the interviewee, which helped us refine and tailor our questions. All participants received a brief project description and consent form outlining confidentiality conditions and procedures for storing interview materials. We used two recording formats, audio during in-person meeting and video during Zoom sessions. Each format has its advantage. Video interviews, for example, may involve initial tension or minor technical issues, but they allow us to observe emotional and behavioral reactions much more clearly. After the interview, we produced a full transcription, noting speech patterns, pauses, intonation, and the interviewee's reaction, all essential for further interpretation. Finally, the interaction is not limited to the recorded conversation. Before the interview, participants often discuss procedural detail. After the interview, many reflect on the conversation itself and the emotional state, ethical questions and broad concerns about future of European and Ukrainian academia also frequently arise. In some cases, interviewees shared particularly sensitive or traumatic topics of the record, such as family or professional conflicts, crisis of faith, or a sense of hopelessness. All of this is documented in the interview protocol. because interview often touch on events that are ongoing or were recently experienced, they may evoke strong emotional or re-traumatization. For this reason, our work must follow key ethical principles: voluntary participation, academic integrity, and full respect for interviewees' rights. Above all, this includes obtaining informed consent. If one interviewees put it, you are not ready to think about it, but you are ready to talk about it. Ethical considerations are central to contemporary oral history research, and we pay particular attention to ensuring respondent safety, especially to protection of personal data. At this stage, all participants' names are encrypted, and we avoid referring to specific places of permanent environment or temporary residence. And here are some of publications that have already emerged from our project. They address methodological questions, issues of identity and lived experience of forced migration, and the discursive practice of Ukrainian academic, etc. And thank you. And at this point, I will hand the floor over to my colleague, who will continue this next part of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Have you seen my presentation?
Yeah, it's good visible.
Okay, thank you very much. There are many studies devoted to the impact of the war on Ukrainian academia. Based on our interview we collected, our aim was to show the response of Ukrainian displaced scholar to this crisis situation. And we also thinking about the specificity of Ukrainian displaced scholar activities among other waves of forced academic migration. Does it? I don't know, the slide is moving or not? No?
It's not moving for us.
Okay, for me too. Maybe I open the presentation once again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for this.
It always happens.
Maybe this way will be better if I open up. Okay,
yeah, now
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. In our study, we employ an anemic approach, which respects the words and feelings of interviewees and is attentive to the meanings they attach to their experiences. This is why the concept of agency is methodologically important for us. We view the fact of consent to participate in the interview as a manifestation of agency that involves interviewees' awareness of the significance of their testimony. Moreover, we understand our own research work also as a form of agency in response to the present situation. However, in the theoretical sense, the concept of agency lacks an ambiguous meaning. Stefan Fuchs, in his article Beyond Agency, notes that theories of agency merely postulate its existence without deriving specific forms of behavior from this abstract capacity. This is why research on agency must always be empirical and contextual. It addresses questions about the nature, focus, resources, and constraints that shapes particular manifestation of agency in specific circumstances. In our talk, we draw on Bazzani's typology of agentic outcomes. Overall, Bazzani continues the tradition of viewing agency as situationally embedded activity. He stresses the role of structural abilities into agency achievements. Based on this, he proposes a typology of agentic outcomes, adaptation, autonomy, and influence, which correspond to the variety degrees of the actor's impact of the social context. You can see this typology on the screen. Our empirical material allows us to develop Bazani's theoretical propositions further. It shows that in the context of forced migration, it's more appropriate to speak of the intersection and interdependence of different types of agentic outcomes, depending on the available resources and on the orientation of agency towards different social fields, home society and or host society. We also take into account that agency is a temporal process unfolding across 3 dimensions: the past, previous habits and traditions, the present, and the future, new opportunities. Our hypothesis is that the agency of Ukrainian humanities scholar in the context of the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war is a dynamic process in which engagement with different social contexts creates different forms and effects of action. A distinctive feature of our approach is that we add an emotional and axiological dimension to the analysis of the structural conditions of agency shaped by ongoing war, forced migration, and professional obligations. We consider emotions and values an integral part of the aspiration and motivation of academics in times of crisis. One of the key manifestations of this dimension in our interviewees' perception of the war as an existential threat. This concerns not only the risk of physical violence and death, but also a broader range of dangers and threats to personal, family, and professional existence, as well to the future of the nation. Forced migration, coupled with the widespread support from host communities, particularly from the European academic community, creates resources, opportunities, and institutional platforms for transforming this perception of the war into a certain type of agency for displaced academics. For a better understanding of the nature of this agency, it's important to outline a few points that support the proposition that the war is perceived as an existential threat. First and foremost, one of the main factors driving our interviewees into internal and external migration was precisely the unacceptability of the prospect for their families to stay in areas occupied or threatened by Russia. Also telling respondents' attempts to physically participate in the fight against the invasion. Many interviewees discuss getting involved in volunteer organization, including those that supported the territorial defense forces in the first week of the war. Other female respondents speak of attempts to actually join territorial defense or even enlist in the army. A number of interviewees testified to being conscious of the duty to make a physical contribution to the war effort. The inability to fulfill this duty, represented in one interview as a moral dilemma, turns in interviewees' narratives into other factors driving them to leave the country. Displacement is conceptualized here not as a fleeing from the war, but as an attempt to continue to serve Ukraine beyond its borders. Finally, a key indicator of the perception of the war as an existential threat is the feeling of guilt for leaving the country, which comes to the surface of many interviews. It's expressed in bodily metaphors, as well in self-definition through negative labels, for example, traitor, cowards, or self-blaming. I left my hair there, I left my country, and so on. This feeling of guilt is also evident in how the majority of our interviewees portray their departure from Ukraine as an act committed under pressure from the family, most often the husbands, or as something they had to do for the sake of the children. So departure was accompanied by a conflict between familial and civic duty, between the personal and the understanding of the war as a threat to the existence and identity of the nation. Thus, civic commitment, the desire to contribute to the fight, and guilt for living were transformed into a form of agency for Ukrainian scholars abroad as a response to a perceived existential challenge of the war. Perceived existential challenge of the war. The nature of this agency lay first in its focus on the home society of Ukraine, and second, in that it became a form of intellectual and moral participation in the war, away from the front lines, taking on the characteristic of a mission. This value-motivated agency, which shaped new professional roles, can be viewed as an achievement of autonomy in Bazani's typology. The principal new role, metaphorically defined in interviewees' narratives in terms of the tasks of representing Ukraine, being the face of Ukraine, or being the voices of Ukraine, found various forms of expression. It was primarily manifested in the drive to counteract Russian propaganda and inform Western society about the war, with the goal of fostering a stable international understanding of the situation and political support for Ukraine in constantly changing conditions. To this end, displaced scholar utilized academic channels, social media, and interpersonal contacts. Interestingly, respondents describe this activity using military metaphors. So the most common metaphor was that of fighting in the informational front, resonating with the Ukrainian media and political discourse about cultural and intellectual work as a form of participation in the war. This activity had its price. Academics engaging in it often risked marginalization within their host institutions, where they could be perceived not through the prism of their professional achievements, but through their experiences of war and trauma. An important part of displaced scholar agency was their effort to disseminate knowledge about Ukrainian culture and history as a form of cultural diplomacy. The following quote reflects one interviewee's understanding of the current situation as uniquely suitable for such work. This work took on particular significance in the narratives of some interviewees in the context of the struggle for the subjecthood of Ukrainian history within Slavic studies, which in Western university had traditionally been represented by Russian studies. This was not simply a matter of expanding the reach of the field. It was also about shifting away from interpreting Ukrainian history within a Russian historical perspective. The ongoing war and challenges of intellectual diplomacy also influenced the changing research agendas of scholars in the humanities. Many respondents shifted their work to studying wartime experiences, responses to the war, and forced migration, while others drew parallels with past events, such as comparing World War II humor with the present. Of course, respondents also tried to accommodate the research agenda of their host institutions, but they stressed that they were doing this using Ukrainian archive material and within the scope of Ukrainian history. For example, one interviewee who found herself in the important European Center for the Study of the History of Red Cross was able to help draw attention to the Ukrainian Red Cross, whose work her European colleagues had perceived as an integral part of the history of the Russian Red Cross. It's important to note that today we are generally witnessing a reevaluation of the importance of the public representation and dissemination of historical knowledge, which is an important element of the informational and ideological aspect of modern war. We know that Vladimir Putin himself actively uses historical interpretation as a tool for waging war. One respondent stated that history today was becoming an instrument of national security. The following quote is also revealing. It reflects a rethinking of the goals of creative work, its correlation with the experience of those who directly engage in combat, and an awareness of the responsibility of academics. Thus, for our interviewees, representing Ukraine in a research perspective means representing the Ukrainians' view of themselves and their own history, which could explain to other Europeans the specifics of their self-identity and the motives for their struggle. Focusing on Ukrainians' themes and subjects becomes for respondents a way to preserve academic credibility. At the same time, the desire to invest this research work with a sense of mission gives additional moral legitimacy to the position of displaced academics. These intentions are originally connected with another semantic dimension of the metaphor of representing Ukraine that we found in the interviews. It marks the role of academics as an intellectual vanguard of society, which actualize society's experiences and values. The following quote is work indicative. Notably, such reflections inspired academics to take on additional professional responsibilities, primarily learning languages, and drove their efforts to integrate into academic communities and work harder in their host institution in order to justify the perceived credit of trust. These are the words of one of our interviewees. Family-related themes, on the other hand, were often pushed to the sidelines of interviewees' narratives. Of course, this is partly explained by the structure of the interviews. Only one question directly concerned family members who left Ukraine with their respondents. However, in some interviews, family care was clearly represented as a constraint of professional adaptation and on pursuit of new academic opportunities. Thus, the agency of displaced Ukrainian academics in relation to their host countries can be described as adaptive. This is as a process of adjusting to existing social structures and maintaining participation in context considered valuable. Such adaptive strategy distinguishes the agency of Ukrainian researcher from that of, for example, Syrian and Turkish academics, who in their relationship with host communities demonstrate influence agency. Notably, Syrian and Turkish academics engage in the critique of the new liberal order in Western universities, discuss the precarity of academic labor, and advocate for support programs that recognize three scholars as full partners who contribute to European knowledge production and enrich it with non-European perspective. Compared to them, the positioning of displaced Ukrainian scholars within the European academic space appears different. For instance, our interviewees rarely touch on the theme of precarity and avoid discussing conflicts. One respondent who had a conflict with the project head, who refused to put on a book cover the name of the Ukrainian author who had written the book, did not mention it in the interview, noting that the references she had received from the institutions had helped her secure her next grant. Only a year later did she publicly speak on the conflict in the presence of the interviewer. This case confirms our hypothesis that interview serves as act of agency and a form of public expression. The absence of the theme of conflict from the narratives of displaced academics can be explained by the imperative of gratitude towards Western academia. This emotional and axiological attitude becomes an element of the strategy for representing Ukraine. To be grateful means to represent one's country as a worthy and appreciative partner, capable of cooperation. This objective is integrated into the logic of the agency of autonomy discussed above. On the other hand, strategies for adapting to the European space imply a desire for a relationship of equality. Several interviews feature stories in which interviewees explicitly speak of the need to be perceived not as refugees, but as full academic partners. However, such statements do not become criticism. No, they serve to express the internal personal resistance to the humanitarian logic of providing aid to displaced academics. Consider the following passage in which a respondent quote Eric Maria remark, "From an insult, you can protect yourself, but from sympathy, there is no way." And she concludes with the phrase, "How can you pity a person who needs weapons? I don't get it." The author of these words links the demand for equal treatment in the academic settings with the awareness of her mission to represent a country at war and speak on its behalf. Thus, this passage also indicates that behind the adaptation strategy lies a high-level agency, the agency of autonomy. In this sense, the adaptation of Ukrainian academics abroad becomes not a goal, but a means of pursuing a professional and civic mission on behalf of their home society. However, the intersection of different types of agency do not end there. Displaced Ukrainian academics claim agency of influence, but this agency is also directed to the home community, in particular at the Organization of Research and Higher Education in Ukraine. The country is currently undergoing fast-track reforms intended to foster new liberal principles in academic life. But in the Ukrainian context, combined with the far-reaching bureaucratization of academic management and the ongoing war, this process intensifies the clash between the logic of survival and the logic of the market. Interestingly, most of the metaphors pertaining to our interviewees' experience as survival and struggle for life occur in the context of not war, but their work in Ukrainian academia. And you can see some of them on the screen. In our view, it's precisely the exercise of agency of influence vis-a-vis Ukrainian academia that determines the somewhat idealized perception of Western academia. The West is seen both as a source of normal standards and as a partner capable of amplifying the voices of displaced Ukrainian academics and providing them with symbolic capital. Ukrainian academics view themselves as carriers of important experience, first and foremost, familiarity with the European research standards, which are expected to help raise the methodological level of the Ukrainian humanities. And as one respondent noted, such methodological rearmament is also a national security measure because it allows for a reorientation of Ukrainian research from the Russian to European academic space and strengthens the country's intellectual sovereignty. At the same time, our interviewees see themselves as carriers of a body of not only overt but also tacit knowledge, implicit norms and practices of academic culture. Many interviewees stress changes in academic culture as the most desirable and significant potential development in Ukrainian academia, and maintaining contact with Western colleagues and strengthening academic ties are perceived as important means towards a gradual transformation of research culture in Ukraine. Thus, interviewees position themselves as actors aware of the problems facing Ukrainian academia and as agents of change. Most of them, when discussing the future, emphasize the importance of returning to Ukraine and home for opportunity to use their newfound experience at home. Many of our interviewees, while abroad, maintain ties to Ukrainian institutions. They continue to teach online, arrange long-term internships, and participate in research projects, often without fundings. However, procedures and practices in academic management today are not conducive to return. Many of our interviewees are losing their jobs and affiliations, and staff and funding cuts in academic institutions effectively deprive them of the opportunity of exercise agency of influence. This situation is seen as consequence not only ineffective university management, but also of government policy in general. For example, some interviewees bring up the law requiring employees of the Academy of Science to return to Ukraine in order to continue their employment after 3 months, just 3 months abroad. One responded commenting on the reduction of special program for Ukrainian research in Germany in 2023, suggested that this was a response to the Ukrainian government's initiatives and its policy of bringing back migrants. She also criticized the current limitation on the length of foreign travel, when long academic leaves lead to a firing of scholars from university based on the law. And as you can see, she said that academics abroad in foreign institutions gaining experience representing Ukraine, hiring German academics and academics from other countries to Ukraine institutions in cooperation. In the end result, after the war, we would have this very strong integration between us and the outside academic world. As a result, the policy of repatriating academics, as well as the general policy in the sphere of research and higher education in Ukraine, instead of strengthening tie with the academic diaspora, are becoming instruments of control. Thus undermines the potential of agency of influence. Moreover, such policies are typically accompanied in the public sphere by discourse of academic losses, thus weakening the symbolic role of Ukrainian academics abroad. They effectively deprive the intellectual diplomacy work of displaced academics of moral support and recognition. In conclusion, we should note that our goal was to show the interconnectedness of the various forms of agency of displaced Ukrainian academics. Of course, other interpretation is also possible on our material, including within framework of the theories of agency. For example, the development of agency is a dynamic process shaped by migrants' resources and temporal orientations. So the structure of international contacts before the war, for instance, previous limited opportunities for integration into the European academic space, can partly explain why some displaced academics remained oriented towards their home institutions. Present critical attitudes towards the education and research system may stem from expectation of future opportunities, and over time became a basis for strengthening adaptive agency. However, in our interpretation, we foreground the emotional and value-based dimension of aspirations, trying to protect respondents' dignity and acknowledge their significance, the significance of their work. This interpretation allows us to present the academics' self-perspective and underscore their desire to maintain professional agency and civic and academic mission, which guide their wartime choices and actions. We believe that this encapsulates the role of academics as society's critical consciousness, capable both of formulating social issues in terms of universal values and of acting in accordance with those values, even in conditions of radical uncertainty and threat. This ability marks academia not only as a sphere of knowledge production, but also as a space of moral responsibility and solidarity. Thank you very much for your attention, and we will be very grateful for your questions and remarks. Thank you.